and welcome to Season 3, Episode 6 of SteamLUG Cast. We're recording this on Friday the 20th of March. My name is Cheese, and with me I have Bean.
Hello there.
Hero.
Greetings.
And special guest from Defiant Development, Morgan Jaffit. How are you?
Very well. Thanks for having me.
I probably should have asked if that was how you pronounce your name.
Yep, no, that's... look, I when you've got a name, both a first name and a surname that are slightly odd, you just get very relaxed. If it sounds right, that's near enough.
Morgan is odd?
It was odd many years ago. I'm quite old.
It's okay, you're amongst friends.
That's all right. Most of us are. Alrighty. So before we dive in, and we'll just have a quick recap of what everyone's been playing lately. Bean, what have you been up to?
Oh, well, obviously been playing Hand of Fate. I'm kind of upset with myself. I didn't actually finish it yet. I'm in the bottom row. We'll get to the game later. Played Horde and Borderlands 2 during the past couple of events we had. Some Guns of Icarus, playing a lot of Torchlight 2, a little bit of Counter-Strike Global Offensive, started up Journey of a Roach, and been playing a bit of Assault Android Cactus. So, Hero, what have you been playing?
Coincidentally, I too have been playing Hand of Fate. And also a bunch of Guns of Icarus. Occasionally playing some Necrodancer, Crypt of the Necrodancer, Dying Light, Kinetic Void, Distance, Torchlight 2, and the open source client for Star Wars Jedi Knight Jedi Academy. But from Steam, so I guess that counts, right?
I have to fire that up, because it's like the open source version has Rift support now, I think.
Does it? There might be, I'm sure there's lots of open source versions, so you'd have to poke around.
Yeah. But I'm keen to play that with a head-mounted display. I think that'd be cool.
It's pretty fun. But what have you been playing, Cheese?
I have had a little bit of time for playing games. Like you guys, I've been playing Hand of Fate. I have made it to the bottom row as well. Currently chasing down the King of Scales, I believe. I've been playing some Assault Android Cactus, Necrodancer, trying to do the daily challenges there. Found some time to play a little bit of Shovel Knight again, always some fun. Been getting into Worms Clan Wars with Namoda and a couple other people. Had a little go at Torchlight 2 with Bean, and I've been testing something that I can't really talk about, which is really cool and coming soon, and keep your eyes out and stuff.
Can't wait.
And Morgan, have you had time for playing games at all lately?
I have an 8-week-old at home, so I haven't been playing a ton. And most of what I've been playing is mobile. The irony is that in the last couple of days, I've actually played a ton of Card Crawl, which is a game that's nothing at all like Hand of Fate, except it looks a little bit like Hand of Fate. It has a dealer on the other side of the card table, which is why I noticed it originally. Somebody pointed it out. And it turns out that it's an awesome little kind of card-based solitaire Klondike style fantasy game. And I've quite enjoyed that, actually.
Yeah, neat. And before we jump into the main show content, we're going to have a more focused chat with Morgan about his past and Hand of Fate, the game that they're working on at Defiant Dev. So I guess you want to tell us a bit about yourself, give us some background information on both your own history and the studio's history.
Yeah, so I come from a background, I've been in game development for about 15 years now, starting at Irrational Games and then working at Relic and Ubisoft, a Montreal-based company called Artificial Mind and Movement, and then coming back to Australia to work for Pandemic Games. Pandemic was bought by Electronic Arts, and that went about as well as Electronic Arts buyouts normally do, which meant that Pandemic was shut down, and the sister company in America, Pandemic Studios LA, was also shut down. And at that point, that left quite a lot of developers in Brisbane that we knew around. From there, after about a year, we set up Defiant Development, basically to take advantage of the fact that we thought there was a good opportunity in the market. You know, with distribution opening up, it made a real difference in how viable it was to be making your own projects. But also because we thought that, you know, there's basically nothing worse than wasted opportunity. And having a whole bunch of really talented developers in Australia and a whole bunch of studios closed down, is the very definition of wasted opportunity. They were really, really talented game developers, and some of them were working, making coffees or stacking shelves instead of making games. So we set up Defiant. We've started in mobile and augmented reality projects. And over time, we kind of built up enough of a war chest to get back into console dev, which is to a large extent really where all the teams started. And Steam has been the big opportunity. So Hand of Fate we've worked on for the last 2 years, and it's now gone 1.0, and it's been a really great experience.
So, Hand of Fate, how long? Hang on, sorry.
So yeah, I can give you a bit more of a background on kind of how that timeline works for Hand of Fate, which is that we put together a demo that we showed at PAX Australia 2 years ago now, when PAX was earlier in the year, and that was a couple of months of work to kind of show a proof of concept. We also took the same proof of concept to GDC to kind of show to publishers. And then we spent another 12 months or so working on fleshing that out before we had a Kickstarter. We raised $55,000 in the Kickstarter, and then roughly 4 or 5 months after that, we got our first builds out to backers. And from that point, we spent nearly a year in a monthly routine of getting builds out to backers, taking people's input, making changes, improving the gaming. That transition from being Kickstarter backers to being early access, about halfway through that process, and then we spent ultimately 7 months in early access before releasing the 1.0 version.
So had you been involved with any crowdfunding projects previously? Was Kickstarter a new experience for you?
It was a new experience for us, and it was a really good experience overall, except that it's terrifying and hard work. But having people on board from a very early stage and involved in the process was completely new for us. We really do come from a background which is pretty much traditional dev, not games as service or any of those sorts of things. Just make a game, put it in a box, maybe ship a patch, and then call it done. Spending 12 months working backwards and forwards with the community on live development of the game was a completely new experience.
I would just say, as someone who managed to get in on the crowdfunding side of things, it's been a real pleasure to watch the game evolve over the past however long it's been. It's been a year and a half, I guess, or something like that.
Yeah, something like that, all told. I'm glad to hear that. It's really interesting. Some people get involved in early access and effectively don't pick up a build until it's 1.0 ready. Some people play early on and get tired of it, and then don't come back when it's really good. But I think for people who've watched along the way, it's been a fun ride.
Yeah.
So speaking of that early access and having players come into it while it's still in progress, what are some things that changed based on player feedback during that process?
Probably the biggest ones, initially the deck building focus and communication were much lower. The game we would now describe as a deck building game. It's also a bunch of different other games, but that got surfaced. And the big thing from kind of a influence from users' perspective is difficulty balancing and communication and mechanics. There's a lot going on in Hand of Fate. We have a lot of interlocking mechanics. They all interact in different ways. And in early builds, you really had to dig in to find out where that was. Now we're much more conscious about what we present to the player, how we explain it, and also what we don't present to the player and what we don't explain, but leave players to dig into if they're interested. And making all of that, I guess, that very complex broth easily accessible to the players is the biggest thing we got from early access by a long shot.
It's interesting because like the card style of things, like people ask me if it's a card, like a CCG, and I go, no, not really. It feels to me, when I play, it feels more like that's an aesthetic choice, like it's a stylistic thing rather than a game design thing. But the deck building aspect, is still there. It's still present, but it's, I guess, more optional than most CCGs would have, I suppose.
And the thing about Hand of Fate, and the reason we're always really reluctant to describe it as a CCG or a roguelike or an RPG or a deck building game or an action game is because those are all genres with their own rules and staples, and we sample from all of them, but we're a legitimate version of none of them. Like you can't look at the game and say, yes, this is a CCG. You do collect cards, but if you are a CCG player and you come to the table expecting a CCG, then you'll be disappointed. And that's been the hardest thing for us, I think, about Hand of Fate, through the course of development, is explaining exactly what it is. And fortunately now we've reached the point where enough people have played that people are like, what is the game? It's sort of a hybrid mash, and you have to check it out and then you'll understand it. It'll all make sense. Which is good, but we could easily have slipped into the obscurity of what is this game? I don't know. It's not really an anything. Don't worry about it. So it's we were pleased with the way it ultimately worked.
Yeah, it is a hard game to pitch.
I've had a lot of friends very confused about what the game is. So then I'll just point them to a live stream that one of us are doing and say, here, look. And then they get it.
I have to say, I think our life has been saved by the kind of rise of streaming that's happened over the course of the development, because the game does stream well. It makes perfect sense if you check it out on a stream, but it is hard to explain. And this is, I worked at EA, and EA spends a lot of time on the, make sure you've got the marketing pitch, what they call the razor, from day one. And, they hone it and they hone it, and it's all, this game has to be really simple to explain so that our marketing people can get behind it. I sort of went the other way with this project, partly because that was just the way it was all falling together, and partly out of spite. We never had a clear elevator pitch. We never had it together in that fashion, and that's how we've ended up with something that's a little bit new, which is good.
Yeah, I mean, it's like nobody remembers a game for being easy to describe.
Yes, exactly.
But when people ask me about it, I normally sort of say, imagine that FTL had real-time third-person combat and a tarot card aesthetic, and people kind of vaguely know that they have no idea what they're hearing me talk about, but as soon as they see it, it clicks. I really like that that it's something that you can pick up visually from watching a video, and that's not always possible with some games,
People have to pay attention to a video for long enough. We often, when we were demoing it at things like PAX, we'd often have two machines set up, and people would wander past and be like, is this game that's on this one the same as this game that's on this one? Because they look like totally different games. And it's exactly right. If you bear with it, you get it. And the FTL comparison, I think, is very fair. We were very inspired early on by FTL, and I think that shows through in a lot of our decisions. It's remarkable how many people don't see that because of the difference in genres and the difference in aesthetics. It's always interesting to me to see how reviewers respond to games, but very, very few people bring up the FTL comparison, and I think it's a really fair comparison.
Speaking of inspirations, was there anything else you'd like to talk about?
In terms of other inspirations, there are so many other inspirations, and it's really
Gauntlet.
Exactly. And some of these get touched on in the game.
Golden Axe.
The goblin stuff comes from Golden Axe. It was an excuse to go digging through all of the childhood games that inspired us as game developers and pull out the things that we liked. I was raised on fighting fantasy game book adventures. There's a ton of that influence in there. The Field of Poppies card is very much drawn direct from one of the wizardry books, I think, is where that crops up. The art style comes from kind of tarot-inspired side of things. There's bits of FTL, there's bits of Golden Axe. That's the nice thing about making a genre mash, is you can just pull in all of these bits of inspiration, and you see that in cards too. Designers and members of the team have kind of drawn on elements that and specific games that they were inspired by. The Ultima 4 has character generation handled by a tarot reader that you go to see in a caravan in the middle of the woods, and that's one of the things that inspired the dealer character in Hand of Fate. So there's a lot of basically anything that was cool for a nerdy kid in the 80s. There's a dash of it in there.
And, that's one of those things where when you bring a bunch of disparate pieces like that from all kinds of places, there's really a risk of it kind of coming this jumbled mess. And that's one of the things I've noticed about Hand of Fate is it's a very consistent and clean experience throughout the whole thing, despite having all these other influences and game types included.
Yeah, and on that I give huge credit to our whole team. So our code and our design and our user interface team are great, but also really to our art director, who's very much focused on making sure that the presentation bar is there and consistent and cohesive. So Sean Eustace, who handles our art direction, has always had an approach where he's tried to bring kind of the 3D modeling and elements of that into the world. Even with games like Destroy All Humans, which he worked on, trying to make the menu system there cohesive and coherent. So it's very much part of his kind of ethos and part and parcel. And all of those elements work together. We've benefited hugely from the 12 months of presenting it to people and polishing the game up. That's been a big plus.
And so the game, as you mentioned earlier, was released almost a month ago, was it?
Yeah, it was released February 17th, so pretty much spot on a month.
Yeah. And what kind of reception do you feel it's had in sort of more general terms? We know that having the early access players and the Kickstarter supporters being able to promote the game and live stream has been helpful. But what sort of feedback have you been getting more directly?
The reviews and the general feedback have been really gratifying. It seems like people have really picked up on all of the nostalgic elements that I spoke about, and people have really embraced the game. We always said early on that we thought we were in a good place and we thought the game was coming together well, and our biggest problem was an awareness problem. And since launch, we've managed to cross the threshold on awareness, which is great, and get more people engaged. And pretty much everybody who's reviewed it and played it has spoken well of it.
So one thing, I'm not sure the nicest way to broach this, but now I should have probably mentioned earlier that I'm currently helping you guys a little bit with some community and support stuff, and looking at some of the feedback.
Yes, conflict of interest, ethics in journalism.
Yep. One thing I've noticed is compared to some of the other projects that I've worked on, there seems to be people build up expectations during development when there's some kind of open development process where they can get access to early builds, like Steam Early Access and like the Kickstarter rewards. People have a chance to build up expectations that in more traditional development models they wouldn't have. Do you feel that as a result of that, early access games are judged more harshly than games that people haven't had a chance to get used to during development, in that people can't see the bugs that were already known about or the decisions that were made, and don't have the opportunity to second guess the judgment behind making those decisions to let things slide to allow release to move forward, or decisions with regards to gameplay elements or whatever that might not match what an early access player expected the game to do in the long run?
I think that touches on a whole bunch of different elements that are really important. And I think, more than anything else, running a Kickstarter or doing early access is very much about setting expectations and being really, really clear. And people are ultimately signing up on the basis of the promise of what they think you can be. So you've got to try and be as crystal clear as possible with that. And we've been really lucky. Our early access community broadly has been great. Likewise, our Kickstarter community has been great. But, there was somebody who, as soon as we put out our first alpha build to Kickstarter backers, had some complaints. And then, a few posts on the mailing list in, he's like, look, really, like, my big complaint is just that this isn't what I thought it would be. And I said, look, that's no problems. We'll give you a refund because we don't want you on board if it's not what you signed up for. And I'll send you a message when we're all said and done, and you can take a look and see if it is. And I think that's the thing. You want to deal with at the points where you don't meet people's expectations. You really want to jump on that quickly and work out whether that's because you miscommunicated those expectations, whether they've got the wrong end of the stick, and how you can help them to be happy. We had 1,000 backers for Kickstarter, which is a lot of people. Most of those are engaged at bigger or smaller degrees. We probably had 100 people who were hardcore engaged across the forums and so forth. And you've basically got to work with those people to trade off those expectations. I do think that some of those people get really engaged with the game and judge it harder than they would if they just come across it on Steam, because they're committed. And that's true of negative feedback pretty much anywhere you get it. Like anytime you ever encounter negative feedback on a game, it's because whoever it is cares. Like, it's much easier to throw something aside and not do anything with it than it is to send a detailed report to somebody, even when that detailed report is, as some people say, some people say things like, I've noticed your game has bugs, will you release a patch? Or are you literally Satan and just exist to fuck over your users? Could go either way. But whoever that was is somebody who actually cares. Like, it takes effort to send the email. They care about the outcome. They just want to know that there's a patch coming ultimately. And that's how we've always looked at it, is that angry users are just impassioned users who are disappointed. And hopefully we can work with them to work out a way to make them happy.
That's a good attitude.
Yeah, very positive. Good to see that.
Well, if you don't have players, then why make a game? So, and as I was talking to somebody the other day, they said, "Look, I do support, and tech support's horrible, but I used to work in retail, and in retail people can throw things at you. So it's hard for people to throw stuff at you over email. So that's slightly better."
That's funny because I think that the most of us have worked in retail or worked in some kind of customer facing role where that's been a risk, and all I can think is I'm glad that people don't throw things at me anymore.
And that's the thing, it has the commonality there of you're dealing with people at their most unhappy, and but if you work with them, you can generally get them around. Like, everybody's pretty reasonable. Our user base has been really good overall.
I gotta say that as far as the stuff that I've come across, I can, like, the overwhelming majority of people who have managed to find a negative experience or have some kind of problem, the bulk of those people finish up whatever it is that they're saying with some comment saying that they love the game and they really appreciate the work that's been done. And I find that that's really cool.
Yeah, and the other thing is, like, without all of these people reporting stuff, Dan has gone through and hand implemented every controller under the sun. There's weird people have the strangest devices plugged into their machines. But had we not gone through all of that in early access, then people, and the flip side of early access is early access players are much more accepting that some stuff might not work, and they tend to report it. They tend to say, are you going to do something about this? So when we actually launched our 1.0 version, we still don't have every controller, but we had a much better range of systems and a much better range of controllers that the game worked with. And that made our launch experience much better from that perspective, because people were willing to say, hey, this doesn't work for me, or I'm having problems with this particular setup.
I guess the other thing that provided an opportunity for, and this is something that I've been involved with a tiny bit, because I think the first thing I did that was helping out you guys was actually to write a gamepad profile. But being able to go through all of that in early access meant that at release, the workflows for getting the right information from people were already in place. It's something you're familiar with. It wasn't new ground that you were suddenly dealing with the first time that you had to interact with customers.
Yeah, exactly. Had we just launched cold, we would have had a lot of system-specific bugs, and it would have been much harder to gather information, work out what needed to be done. There's a bunch of really common errors that we've seen a bunch of times. Bloody NVIDIA mobile drivers and cards, and making sure it's running on the right one, which we only really found out about to the degree we did because there was a huge issue with us rendering it all on Intel cards with early drivers, which meant that instead of just showing up as crappy performance, it was showing up as cards not showing properly, and that made it easier to diagnose and easier to make sure that people didn't hit the crappy performance bug. But yeah, it's definitely having those pipelines in places has made a big difference.
We had a lot of similar problems when the 4 launched, or maybe not a lot, but that same aspect of not really realizing that there were a lot of people with dual chipset machines who didn't understand how to configure that and drive that themselves.
This is the tough thing about PC. We often get people who haven't updated their video card drivers in 2 years, and without fail, the comment is, well, Game X works, so it can't be anything with my system, and unfortunately, that's not the way things work.
Yeah,
that's a tough battle to fight. Now, Defiant's most recent stuff was mobile, and then of course this came for the PC, and I believe also PS4 and Xbox One.
Yeah.
What drove the decision to make it cross-platform from the get-go?
Because we really like pain. Is the short answer. But no, the ultimate answer is that we didn't start by making it cross-platform. We started by saying, so Dan's my business partner and the other half of Defiant's core team, and along with Sean, the art director, we look after the day-to-day of the company and decide what projects we'll focus on and where we'll go in the future. And when we sat down 2 years ago, the conversation was about a couple of things. One of them was that mobile was just becoming a really tough business. And the second was that the sort of games that we wanted to make, which, for want of a better word, are premium core experiences, weren't getting a great reception on mobile, but Steam was a good place for those. But also that we saw this rise of things coming with controllers. So 2 years ago, there was talk that there was going to be an Apple TV with a controller on it. Ouya looked like it might be a thing as opposed to a flop. There were upcoming, the PS4 and Xbox One were upcoming. There was talk that Google had a controller-based device coming. There was talk that Amazon had a controller-based device coming. And we looked at that field two years ago and said, look, why don't we make a game that is focused on things that have controllers? So this started as a cranked up mobile game, to point at things like Ouya and Apple TV, and it evolved over the process as we realised that those were really bombing quite hard or not coming out, and became kind of PC Mac Linux focused after about a year of dev. And then during the period between Kickstarter and release, we saw that thanks to the fact that we were developing a new Unity, which is a pretty good multi-platform engine, we saw that we had opportunities to move on to the console platform. So, we approached both Sony and Microsoft, and they were both interested. And at that point, we thought we had something good enough to make the experience of bringing it over there worthwhile. And it's gone well. It's been not quite as straightforward as we hoped, but we're pretty pleased that as a small indie, we've sim shipped on, PC, Mac, Linux, PS4, and Xbox One. That's a big accomplishment for us.
That's just huge. Congratulations on that.
Thank you. It has got much.
Have you used Unity from the beginning?
Yeah, in 5 years of running Defiant, we've been primarily a Unity studio the whole way along. We did a project in Unreal at one point, or a proof of concept for a project Unreal, but we've delivered a whole bunch of different Unity projects, including work for hire projects, and we used to do augmented reality work, and yeah, that's all been part of our kind of DNA as a studio, and it's been great to see Unity increase and improve along the way as well.
There's something that's on the horizon, or on the very close horizon, I guess, is that you guys are moving up to Unity 5 soon, and I find it really cool that, because a lot of studios, once a game's out, they don't want to mess with the core tech, like they don't want to introduce a potential for any instability or bugs, or deal with the work of migrating to newer tech. So what kind of experiences have you had there so far?
Oh God, geez, we hadn't thought about that. This is a terrible idea. What are we doing? Yeah, I think we're just dumb. No, look, we wanted to launch on Unity 5. Unity 5 was beta at the time, and everything we've ever learned says don't change engine when you're in the critical finaling part of your development process. But it turned out that the change to Unity 5 has been much easier and has gone much more smoothly than any of us really expected. So we did the internal test, and right now we're doing a few things. One is that we're updating a lot of the materials in game so that they'll look better. Unity 5 performance is better, particularly on consoles. It's a win across the board, and yeah, it's really nice to have to be able to launch out a new build of the game, which patches in some new content and adds our first kind of bit of DLC for the game, and simultaneously makes everybody's game look and play better. That's a huge win. And like I say, we're not really like a games as service company. We won't have everybody on Hand of Fate for the next 5 years, but we do look at the way the kind of game market works these days, and we expect to sell more copies in Steam sales than we did at launch, probably at a much smaller price, at least eventually, but that means that we've got more players ahead of us than we do who've already played the game. So we should try and keep making the game as good as possible for them. That will be their first experience of the game, and it should be as rock solid as we can make it, and as impressive as we can make it. We'll stop that process soonish, but we're going to keep adding DLC and free content for a good while, just to make sure that everybody gets a really good experience and great value out of it.
Yeah, awesome. I haven't personally tested the Unity 5 build myself, but in more general terms, because us being Linux users, seeing a developer being able to and having a good experience of migrating up to newer tech is really positive for us, because we're one of Unity's newest platforms. So the engine is still maturing here, and there are teething problems, which we've kind of gone through a little bit during Hand of Fate's launch and during early access, and being able to provide Unity with some feedback that's resulted in some improvements to the engine. But I mean, it's kind of great to have the early adopters picking up early versions of Unity and being able to push out Linux games and stuff. But there are, as time goes on, issues are going to be found and resolved, and it's only people who update to the newer versions who are going to benefit from those changes. So it's good to see from that perspective as well.
Yeah, it's actually been a really good process for us because we're on pretty good terms with Unity, and because we were one of the first games, but at least when we launched in early access on Unity for Linux, there weren't a ton of commercially released Unity Linux titles, and we were able to roll those bugs back. And a lot of them, as you say, have been addressed in Unity 5. So it's a big plus in terms of improving the experience on that side. And it's unfortunate that the experience is still, there's still more kinks in, as you say, just down to engine and things that we haven't found yet because of the smaller user base on the Linux side. But we're pretty happy with the Linux implementation, and the Unity 5 Linux implementation will be great.
What kind of feedback and response do you feel you've had from Linux users? Do you think it's been positive? I mean, like in general, like as far as Unity games go, I think that it's been pretty solid.
Well, I think Linux users in general, like much more so than Mac users, and not to denigrate Mac users, but there's similar proportions of our user base. And we don't tend to hear a ton from Mac users, but we do hear from our Linux community. And I think, the Linux community still remembers the time when there were no games, with all due respect to Tux Racer. And they're still appreciative of the fact, and they understand that if they're not vocal, then developers don't come to Linux because it doesn't tend to be high on most people's priority list out of the gate. And that means that they're, we've found in general that they're super engaged, super informed. They're used to kind of having to hack stuff together to make it work. So you get really detailed and informative bug requests back, and kind of lists of things that people have tried. The Linux community punches well above its weight in terms of number of users and the kind of response and feedback we get from them.
Yeah, and an example, within the past month, we've been dealing with a person using Mesa and had resulted in, I think it was 3 upstream bugs being fixed in Unity.
Yeah, exactly.
And then some of that's been able to roll some of that in advance into Hand of Fate builds, which has been really cool.
No, it has. It's been an awesome process, and like I said, that all comes from engaged and responsive users. There's not a ton of them, but there's enough to really make a difference. And I think the other thing is, like, the Linux users in a lot of ways have been the bedrock of our community. They're the ones who spread the word. They're the ones who start the conversations. They're the ones who organise things like this chat. There's a huge number of pluses. So
that's really good to hear. So you mentioned content updates to the game. Is there anything that you're comfortable talking about that might be on the horizon?
Yes. So we're just about to launch our first DLC, and our first DLC is what we call the Fates system. This basically gives you a bunch of different ways to play the game, and that includes playing it in easy mode and playing it in hard mode. So that gives people some difficulty levels and some abilities to kind of try an Iron Man approach to the game, I guess, with a lot of negative modifiers turned on. And then there's a lot of different ones that are flavor based, and it lets you reapproach all the game's content with a slightly different spin on things. There are characters who eat gold instead of food. And a whole bunch of different changes along that front, and that should be out really soon. And I'm pretty excited about how all that falls together, because that helps to make everything that you've already played a fresh challenge, and should make the leaderboards pretty interesting too. Beyond that, we're working on adding more cards, more quest chains, more unique content, and again, things that change up the way the whole game plays is kind of the stuff we're thinking about right now.
Yeah, Bean and I were talking a little while back because when he picked up the game, I'd already played a little bit and I'd been involved from the beginning with the crowdfunding campaign. So we kind of had this. He had the newer perspective and I had the older perspective, and we were able to kind of back and forth on our thoughts on the game. And we were talking about how a little while back we were talking about how the automatic deck building can provides a kind of I think the goal of it is to provide a kind of balanced experience of nice cards versus not nice cards. But just tuning the random number generator there or just tuning your deck in general can provide a very different kind of experience. So if you go with entirely friendly cards, it feels like the rewards aren't quite as great. So it's still challenging in its own way, but you get a very different experience compared to if you're, say, token hunting and you're always putting in everything that's new, or if you're trying to go hard and you're putting in all of the like really challenging or risk-oriented cards.
Now, additionally, if you fail really badly but you unlocked a lot of tokens, you still gain something from that playthrough besides just the experience.
You feel good, yeah.
That's exactly right. I would agree 100% with those comments. And the automated deck builder didn't exist in early builds, and then it did exist and it was very, very prominent and people were kind of guided into using it. And then we ended up with it in the position it is now, which is that it's there and it's offered to you, but it's not forced on the player. There are points in the game where the game gets really difficult, where we are expecting that people will then go over to the deck builder and tweak their deck. That's happening a lot less than we expected. So we probably have, like, the difficulty curve probably is a little more aggressive for players who don't change their deck. But it's really interesting to see how players will often really enjoy the game, play it a lot, but hit a card like Davy Jones' Locker, which you should only...
I was about to bring that up.
Yeah.
Devil's Carnival.
Oh, exactly, which you should only have in if you're token hunting. Like, and then they're like, oh, this card is horrible. And, the response is always the same, which is you could take it out. And they're like, but I must have every token. And it's like, well, with Davy Jones Locker, probably, token hunt for that separate to trying to keep progressing in the game, because otherwise there's potential issues. But yeah, different people embrace the deck building to different degrees, and I think that's something that we've now realised and we'll deal with better in the future.
In some ways, it kind of feels like it's positive that there are cards like is it Ancient Treasure is the other one that's a bit nasty.
Yeah.
Where the chances for having a positive outcome, like from the card's perspective, are quite low, but they add this element of risk in there that is optional. If it was too easy, then you just whiz through the token hunting part, and there wouldn't really be much of a challenge. But
I think you just described the first level, the first three.
That's right. And, Courtney, who's the designer who's responsible for most of the token chains and for a lot of the very difficult achievements in the game, really spent a lot of time making sure there was sufficient depth there. And again, this comes down to the game's hard to explain, and we approach it in different ways. There's a lot there to keep you engaged if you want to dig deep into the game. We only ever talk about the major campaign, which is 12 to 13 hours for most people, and we always say that if you consider that good value for money, then you should appreciate the game, because we feel like we've delivered a really great authored 12 to 13 hour experience. But we certainly have players who've dug 40 or 50 hours into the game to knock out all the achievements and to hit all the content, and that's really gratifying too.
Talking about the chains of cards, something that I really appreciate, because I guess the way that I see Hand of Fate is that it's kind of a dungeon crawler at its heart, maybe. And with these sorts of things, you don't often have a lot of deep story that evolves over playthroughs. Like usually it's like you start your game and that's the beginning of the story kind of thing. But the card chains and the tokens give the opportunity for narrative threads to weave their way through multiple play sessions. I think that's really, really cool.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was early in early access, I think, when people had just started doing the first Let's Play videos of Hand of Fate. And Courtney, our designer, turned around and he said, all through this, sorry, excuse that train. It sounds like I'm on the tracks, but I'm really not. But yeah, Courtney turned around and said, look, we thought we were making a game that was about cards or maybe an action RPG, but I think when you get down to it, the game's actually about collecting tokens. And that's when we realized that the tokens were both a good mechanic for having persistence across gameplay, good mechanic for unlocking new cards, but also just fun. Like, it's fun to collect tokens. It's fun to hunt for new stuff. And it really gave the deck building side of the game more meaning and gave us ways to point the players to the depth that was there. So it's been really good across the board.
It also makes it so people are more likely to take the risky task.
That's exactly right.
As opposed to just skipping around this card. They're going to actually fight.
Yeah, that's right. You've got to have some sort of motivation to get players in there, and that helps a lot.
Do you think that in the future there might be ways that better highlight the relationships between cards so that you can retrospectively review these chains?
Yeah, there's a whole... In general, as I say, I think we did really well in terms of communicating what's important and doing that in an order that the player can learn, and allowing the player to dig in and discover more depth if they want. For example, the pips on the corners of monster cards tell you how upgraded that monster is.
Right.
So as the bandits are upgraded to throwing knife bandits, the cards have more pips in the corners. But we never really explain that anywhere. You've got to kind of intuit it, but you can dig into that if you want. Generally speaking, because we didn't know what the game would be like when it was done when we started, we've done okay on all those communication, but there's definitely room for us to improve the way that we communicate the overall kind of history of the cards, and also things like when curses have an impact and when you lose cards, and we're cleaning up a bit of that at the moment. I don't know if that'll ever see the light for Hand of Fate 1, or whether it's something we'll think about for future games, but there's definitely room to make all of that.
I see a question in chat here asking whether or not the upcoming DLC is likely to be free for backers and early access players.
The upcoming DLC will be free for everybody who backed the game and everybody who joined during early access. So when we went from early access to 1.0, as a thank you to everybody who played the game when it wasn't ideal, we said we'd make the first DLC free to all of those people, and backers, we've also get the first DLC. Backers will probably get any future DLC as well, and the early access players will be on their own from there. But yeah, we believe in looking after people who joined in early.
That's cool.
So speaking of backers, there were a couple of rewards, I think, cards with guest designers and stuff that didn't quite make it in. Is that likely to be in the upcoming DLC or another future one?
I hope so. Some of those designers, it's all come down to time. Those people were really generous and happy to volunteer their time at the start of the project. The game took quite a long time, and in various cases their schedules have heated up, and they just haven't been able to find the time to work back and forth with us. We've got one set that's in great shape and will ship out in a future update. The others I'm not 100% sure about.
So how are they going to manifest themselves in the game? Are they just going to be normal cards that you can add to your deck, or are they going to be sort of like a separate line from the main campaign?
Yeah, there'll be basically chains that you can add to your deck. So they'll be like any other chain, but it'll have a root starting card that you can add, and that'll set you off down an adventure.
Yeah, nice. So another thing that was in the crowdfunding campaign was like a physical version of the game. How do you feel that compares to the digital version of the game in terms of the experience that players are having? Because I noticed that that's getting a really good reception, or has had a really good reception so far.
Yeah, and again, this comes down to our, I wanted to make sure that everything we did, we over-delivered on. So our physical pieces are really nice. We made physical tarot decks, and we've got a little physical version of the meeple that you move around in game. That's bronze and looks awesome. You can see some of these if you go look at our Kickstarter page. You can see some of these, or on our Facebook page. And the card game is an interpretation of Hand of Fate that uses 2 decks of cards, and they're kind of normal tarot decks. They're not the full Hand of Fate card set, but it's really fun. It's really fun. I'm super pleased with what we've done across the board there, and we've had so many requests from people who missed early access and have asked, can we get, can you remake the tarot decks? Can we do more of the physical editions? And we might do another run down the line to make that work. They're really tough to, the whole production and pipeline on those things is tough. We're not experts at making physical goods, so it's time consuming and not very profitable, because we'd much rather sell the digital copy of the game, but people want them, so we'll probably try and make more in an unlimited edition. And at the very least, we'll try and offer them on sites that do, print on demand style stuff, so that if people really want them, they can get them from there.
That'd be sweet.
I am pretty stoked that we made our own tarot deck. Like, I just think that's cool. 18-year-old me thinks that's cool. To be honest, like, that's a lot of what's in the game. A lot of what's in the game is just things that would make 16-year-old me really happy, and likewise for the rest of the crew. It's kind of a love letter to our to the gaming memories that forged us.
Sabine and Hero, as players who've fairly recently come to the game, do you have any favorite aspects that we haven't touched on, or any favorite cards or moments that you've had while playing?
Favorite cards? Mr. Lionel, the Maiden, the Helpful Priest.
I see a trend there.
Yeah, and shops. I love throwing shops in there so that I can skip them. Like we described, Cheese and I have different approaches to it. For some of the earlier levels, I wanted to make it a sprint to the boss, so I could get there with 100 health and as few curses as possible. No, I think for me, the favorite thing I've seen is the difficulty progression. Like, those first 3 levels are really, here's the introduction to the core mechanics, and here's how you begin to, this is how the game is played. But then after you beat that first boss, and I think it's the cup you get, that's it. The game is completely different from that point. There's a lot more challenge involved, and by the time you reach the 3rd stage, now food becomes very critical to what you're doing. And so I really, that progression is really what I've enjoyed most. And of course, as the decks get bigger and you get new cards, that quest gets longer and the narrative spells out. I really like that part of it.
When I've been streaming it, when I first started, there were a couple of people who said, "Oh, the combat seems like really, really easy." I'm like, "Yeah, no, this is the beginning of the game. Like, the individual runs might be short, but the game itself is geared towards this long play evolution of the game mechanics maturing and deepening."
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't say that we got our difficulty levels nailed on perfectly, but growing that evolution, it's sort of the opposite of what we used to do in mobile. In mobile, they basically say if you can't catch people's attention in 10 seconds, then forget it. But we knew that when people settle into like a PC or console game, they're there for longer, and they're more likely to spend the time kind of getting a sense of what the texture and progression is. That said, we probably do start a bit easy and we end a bit hard, but yeah, it's been tough to work out where the right place is for all of those. And for a lot of people too, it's their first combat brawler. Like, we have everybody from like really experienced Arkham Asylum vets who also play a ton of Hearthstone and card games and roguelikes and are like familiar with everything we're doing, all the way to people where this is kind of their first game in one or many of those genres. And trying to make it kind of work for everybody has been a real trick.
I think Hand of Fate really highlights that, when it comes to these genres and stuff, that people don't stick with one style of game, that people like to try a bit of everything, and that the overlap between the audiences for different genres are far more prominent than a lot of people like to make out.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think there are many players these days who are like one genre players. Gamers, even like on the super casual side, where you've got people who like play Candy Crush repeatedly, that almost always leads to but what else is out there? And I think pretty much everybody is a multi-genre gamer. They have their favourites, but they get around a bit. Cheese says he knows people who only play Battlefield. I did meet somebody when I was in the States. I was over there for PAX, and they were like, "Oh, you're here for that games convention. Do you play shooters or sports games?" And I'm like, "There are other options." He's like, "Nah, I play the FPSs, and I think he called them the Call of Duties." He said, "I play the Call of Duties, and I play the sports." And I'm like, "Okay, good. That's a set." I'm like, "There's other stuff." He's like, "Nah."
At least he's having fun.
It's Madden, Call of Duty, Madden.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah, if they're having a good experience, then cool.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it does eventually lead to people playing other stuff too. Yeah, I apologise for the birds waking up in the background too. As people have pointed out, we've got the cockatoos and the rosellas and the various
It's a lorikeet as well, I think.
kookaburras waking up.
I love the cockies. I mean, I had a friend who visited from North America, and they'd never seen one before. And they're like, "Wow, look at this bird! It's so pretty. Oh, it's white, and it's got this nice little yellow bit, and it stands out, and looks nice." And then it opens its mouth and shrieks, and it's this terrible, terrible sound that comes out of them.
Yeah, the contrast is fun.
They're funny characters.
So, speaking of the streaming of cheese, and the difficulty and the mixing of genres, that's basically what got me into this game. Watching cheese, and seeing that it was not just a card game as it appeared to me on the Steam storefront, but the roguelike adventure fighting card sort of thing was what got me interested. And then when I started playing it, and I saw that the beginning was almost tutorial-like in its easiness, and I knew that it was going to get way more difficult because I'd watched cheese earlier. But it's been really fun. I've blazed through the first 2 rows.
That's something that I found like sort of being fairly common, is that most people who pick up the game who hadn't had a lot of exposure to it previously, or people who have just come across a let's play of it or whatever, that the game seems to provide people with pleasant surprises, and challenge some of their expectations.
And I think that's part of, like, again, that goes down to the early access process. And, the great thing about early access too is, as I say, people streamed it. So we could watch people play and get a sense of what they were enjoying and add more of it, get a sense of where they were getting stuck and get them past it. But also just to keep our interest through the early access development, we did keep adding new surprises. So the game started structurally simpler, and it's grown as it's gone, because we've gone, oh yeah, we can add a little bit there, and people are reaching this point, so it's time to add a little extra around the edge for those people. And we wanted to make sure people were engaged all the way through that early access process and right up to 1.0, and that there was some new stuff even when it hit 1.0 for people to play with. So that's been part of it. I just noticed Oxy in chat saying the game surpassing its expectations is the secret fun ingredient. And I think to a large extent that's where execution comes in. You know, there's nothing inherent in the concept that makes it easy to explain or inherently fun. But I do think we've explored a lot of the things not to their natural conclusion, but certainly a good way down that path. And we try and make sure that there's something rich for players to discover as they keep playing. And that's why eventually, I guess, we reached the point where we're like, yeah, we're ready to go to 1.0, because we're like, yep, there is a journey with interesting things around the corner for the entirety of the journey, and it's therefore ready to go out.
That's awesome. And Hero, did you have any favourite moments or favourite cards or stuff that you want to bring up?
I think something that stands out to me, one of the cards, sleeping at an inn and then being robbed. I did not expect the outcome when I initiated the combat. I expected to get a token, and I did not get a token.
Yeah, there's nothing. Those are probably the loudest comments we get on Let's Plays and streams is when people are like, "What do I have to do to get this damn token?" Across the board for token.
Hello, Devil's Carnival.
Yeah, exactly.
I thought it was really awesome, but it took me by surprise.
Sleep at the Inn in particular, it feels like it offers you a little bit of story stuff.
Yes.
Even if you don't get the token.
Definitely.
Yeah, and that's one of those cards that, again, evolved over the course of the game. It was a real unlocking for the designers, I think, when they realised they could do a little more storytelling across the course of the token chains. You know, that gave an opportunity to evolve a little bit of narrative, because, you know, it's hard in a game that's essentially randomized to work out where your linear style storytelling can come in. But once we'd landed on the tokens and the token chains, that really opened up some opportunities.
Yeah, and that narrative thread in particular, I don't think I've progressed it beyond that particular card, beyond Asleep at the Inn. I've unlocked a token for it and moved on with more of the game. I hope that I will see more of that at the end of the game.
I'm not sure if Asleep at the Inn is a chain or whether it's just we've moved stuff around in the latest build, so I'm trying to make. I cannot confirm or deny it. There's 450 cards, and I don't have them all in my head right now as their current status is.
No, the I guess the narrative thread that brings up with the ghost and stuff is something that I'm looking forward to finding more about.
Yes, that's paid off in interesting ways. I say in a very non-specific fashion.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil it either. It's kind of like Bean. I'm disappointed that I didn't quite manage to progress beyond the third row. Or the last row of cards. It's the fourth row, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the fourth row.
Yeah. It's really interesting, actually, to look at what people take from what people expect and understand of the game's kind of overarching plot and what people think of the game's finale without going into details. And there's a lot about the game that's unsaid, but it is clearly defined. The background of the story, the reasons that things happen are very clear to us on the development side. And a lot of the clues are there. And we've seen some very compelling theories from players on the forums.
Yeah.
And while I've not posted to any of those to say, you know, this is correct or incorrect or otherwise, some people are really close to them.
You know, that's kind of funny. I just realized now that at all of this discussion of the game, the one thing we didn't seem to bring up was kind of one of the most enigmatic pieces of the whole thing is the dealer. I mean, he's kind of central to it, and his attitude, his tone, it came across a little different than I would have anticipated it to be. But I find the dialogue, it seems to come in at the appropriate moments. He's not always talking, and you don't always hear the same phrases.
Yeah, I'm very, very proud of what we accomplished with the dealer, because the dealer was inspired by the fact that I've done a lot of writing for video games in in my time, and I've done a lot of setup for AI. I did a lot of the AI barks in one of the Splinter Cell games. And that's basically writing 300 variations on, I think I heard something over there. And it still gets repetitive and tedious because that's part of the game's communication. You know, the only thing the game really has to communicate with the player in terms of their progress is, did somebody see me and do they think I'm over there? So as part of all that, I thought, look, you know, there could be a better AI character. And as an indie, we could do a better AI character, provided we only do one. Like, we can't do a whole cast, but we can do one who's got unique dialogue that applies to the situation. Some of it is linear, so some of it will only play if other stuff's played. And there's all of these different conditions on each bit of dialogue. But there's also a dialogue manager under the hood that says, you don't need to talk all the time. You don't need to fill every uncomfortable silence. You only need to talk if you haven't already been talking about something and if you've got something interesting to say. And what we've ended up with is thousands of lines hooked to pretty much every possible game event, which means that when the dealer turns around, and it's great, you know, I love it when we get comments from people who are like, wait a minute, the dealer just made a comment about my kind of thuggish approach to things. Are they talking about the fact that I've, you know, just filled my deck with combat cards? Does he know that? And the magic of it is that, you know, in a lot of cases we do know. Like, we do have events set to just about every part of the game, but the dealer also leaves enough to happen in the player's head. You know, I feel like we've captured something pretty unique in terms of the character. It's hard for me to think of another game that has a character who's as varied, and that's because, as an indie, you know, the context that we're in is so constrained, and the mechanics are so specific that we've been able to bring that out, flesh him out, and bring him to life.
I appreciated that he's also used, like, when you die, he'll often offer a comment that you know, if there's a particular thing that you're not doing, you know, like you say, when you might be taking a thuggish approach, or you might not be using weapon abilities, or you might not be using your artifacts or whatever. He'll make comment on that and offer something that might end up help a player, you know, do something that they previously hadn't thought to do or had been forgetting to do.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, that's the nice thing, is that you get the ability to communicate with the player on a different level. You know, we've got card text that you're reading, we've got mechanics that you're playing, we've also got this dialogue that we're talking to you about, so we can slide things in there. And again, you know, one of the nice things about having the game go through early access and spend a lot of time in development and watching streams is we could watch players and we could watch them respond to the dealer, and we could be like, oh, okay, you know, you think you've outsmarted the dealer on that one. Well, we can make a comment on that. Or, we didn't realize that would happen and people would get confused. We can make a comment there to help clear things up. So again, you know, the long dev process has enabled us to evolve that. There's no way we could have done this without doing something like early access. If we just had people in testing the game, it wouldn't have had nearly the same impact.
And is that a model that you think you'll come back to for future games?
Yeah, I can't, like, it's not appropriate for every game, and a lot depends on what sort of game we're making next. But yeah, I find it hard to imagine that we wouldn't do something like this again, particularly now that we've got a user base who are kind of interested in what we're doing and where our games will go next. I'm pretty excited to get people in early so that they can help us make the game great.
So, my favorite dialogue are the times when something really bad happens to you, and the dealer's like, I wish I could help you. Or something like, will you sell your weapon? We'll see.
At last, a chance to eat.
Yeah, it is fun. I did notice one glitch in recently where we're not checking the amount of gold the first time you turn up at a store. So he says something along the lines of, you know, I suppose you're wondering what you've been collecting all that gold for. Now you know. And I'm so disappointed that we stuffed that up. And that's fixed in one of the latest patches. But but outside of that, those are the best ones. The ones where the player feels like he's gently mocking the decision making that they're doing is absolutely my favourite bits of deal.
Right.
Are you sure that's what you're going to do?
Yeah, exactly.
Of course, you've already done it. It's not like you can change your mind, but
Right.
and it's awesome how just that little bit of uncertainty added to things makes players approach the game really differently.
Start to second guess themselves.
yep, absolutely.
And what about you, Morgan? Do you have a favorite card or a favorite moment that that really resonates for you as a developer?
I do have a lot of moments. I think there's a bit that the dealer says about Twisted Canyon where he explains that it's something along the lines of Twisted Canyon. Yes, even in the earliest versions of the game, this card has been there. It's a fundamental building block of how the game goes together, and that's both him reflecting on how he created the game and the game systems as the dealer, but it's also because it was in the first demo that we ever showed. Our first GDC demo, after a couple of months of development, was a complete mock-up. But Twisted Canyon was the first card you flip, so it's the only one that's existed consistently throughout the whole game. And I love that we're able to talk about the game and simultaneously talk about the game. That still gives me a chuckle.
Yeah, I noticed a few.
Yeah, there are a couple of lines which feel like they're commentary on the game development process, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, and a lot of that is because, as I say, I wrote all of the dealer lines, and at that point in time, we'd been arms deep in the development process for a year. In fact, for more than a year, and a lot of it comes from that, from that sense of being immersed in it. And it's always good to make a game about a game. That's one of the things that we wanted to do, from the moment we began. Because when you make a game about a game, you can talk about games in a gamey fashion, and it's still games.
Basically. But yeah, that's I thought that was pretty cool every time I came across one of those dialogues. Things like, that was kind of overpowered.
Yeah, and the I think we're going to change that in a future build, which in a lot of cases we did do.
So the final voice acting for the dealer came in fairly late. Who did the scratch dialogue for that?
There was a Melbourne-based voice performer, Kevin, that we worked with, who did a fantastic job for us early on, and he was able to scratch in a lot of the dialogue. And then we worked with Anthony Scordy, who did the final dealer dialogue, and it's a really, the part of the reason for all the dealer dialogue coming in pretty late is you really only get a few sessions with a pro. We had to book those well in advance and make sure that he had the scripts ahead of time. So we put them as late in the process so we get as many lines as possible. We ended up doing 3 separate voice recording sessions in order to grab everything, and we put one of those right up on the final moment before we shipped the 1.0, which meant right up until the final build, there was still a lot less dealer VO than there was in the final build.
What about in future content updates? Would that mean there'd be no more additions to dealer voice?
It means that I'm trying to work out how to get a bunch of our future content additions recorded in one fell swoop. So right now we're doing all the planning for how the content will look over the next 6 months. And what I'm going to try and do is get scripts written for all of that update content so that there is additional dialogue for all of it. There isn't any additional dialogue for the archetype DLC which we're about to release, but hopefully we'll have some stuff in future lines.
So the voice actor for the dealer was, at what point during the game's development was he cast? Was that something that had been planned from the beginning? Were the lines written with that actor in mind, or was it something that came a bit later?
No, it came later in the process. I have an excellent friend, Mario Lavin, who's a AAA voice producer. He does sound and dialogue for Sony. He used to do it for Guerrilla Games. He's currently working for Kohima Productions. So he's top rate, and basically I spoke to him and I said, look, this is our project. Do you think you can help us do something? And he said, yeah, look, I will cast around. And he sent us casting notes on 3 or 4 different actors that he'd shortlisted, and we sent them a sample script to work through. But that was reasonably late in the process. We had the visual of the dealer at that point in time, and Anthony just blew us away. And he's made the game.
Awesome. Well, on that note, we might finish up this first portion of the show. Was there anything else that you wanted to share about Hand of Fate, or anything else?
No, thanks for having me, and I appreciate the deep dive on everything we've done. It's been really great.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Before we move on, actually, do you have a favorite game? Or what is your favorite game?
It changes over time. I deeply love System Shock as one of the seminal pieces that's influenced me consistently through game development, and also just Mario 64, which is, I think, borderline perfect. Is another real influence, although I haven't gone back and played it in many years, and that's for good reason. I prefer the idealized version in my mind to the actual reality.
Yeah, cool. So we're going to move on to the rest of the show content. You're welcome to hang around if you want, but if you need to disappear, that's fine.
I may vanish to attend to some of the many screaming children that I have, for which I apologise in the background. But I really appreciate you guys having me by.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Awesome, and hopefully we can talk again as future stuff comes out.
Yeah, that'd be great. Alrighty, so moving on to community stuff. Past events. We had a War Thunder event, we had a Robocraft event, we had a Horde event, and we had a Borderlands 2 event. Did you guys manage to make it to any of those?
Yeah, I made it to the Horde and the Borderlands 2 events. The Horde event was only a handful of us. And then Borderlands 2 played for first couple stages again.
I managed to catch a couple games at the end of the War Thunder event. That was pretty fun.
I was hoping to catch that, but just didn't quite make it.
Yeah, we were flying planes against each other.
All right, so upcoming events, we've, totally started about 10 minutes ago. We've got Frozen Cortex. And tomorrow will be 7 Days to Die. And we'll have Hammerwatch and King Arthur's Gold a little later this month.
Nice. As far as other community stuff goes, the new SteamLUG site's live, and development is continuing, refining some of the new features there, and bringing in some new stuff as well.
Hunting down bugs.
That too. Do you guys have any favorite aspects of the new site that you'd like to comment on?
Well, visually it's changed a lot, so if anyone hasn't checked that out already, that might be interesting.
Yeah.
One thing that's not perfect at the moment, we're trying to get a live streaming page working well. And when that works well, that'll be pretty awesome. Make it easier for people to tell when somebody in the community is streaming on Twitch or Hitbox.
I like the new Mumble Tree. I like the way it lays that out. And
oh yes, the Mumble Tree has avatars now.
Yeah, that's cool. Do you guys want to talk a little bit about how that works? How people would go about getting their avatars on there?
Sure. If anybody's interested in their frequent the SteamLUG Mumble server, which, by the way, we'll mention it's at its new address now. It's just mumble.steamlug.org. You can let any one of the SteamLUG admins or the officers know, and we can send a link that'll allow you to actually upload one time an image that'll then match to the name you use in Mumble.
Exciting.
And apparently mine's been broken. I'll have to fix that later.
So Corbin is now hosting the website and hosting the Mumble server. So thank you very much, Corbin, for your donation of server resources there.
In our appreciation, we allow you to edit this cast.
Recently, Game Club played Spy Fox 2, and we were joined by Sandy Spangler and Leah Ver. Bean, you managed to make that. What did you think of that?
Well, it was exciting. I mean, it's a game that was a little young for me and even for my kids at the time when it did come out. So I hadn't actually seen it, but it was good having people that were involved in the project there, because it's always fun to kind of hear about things that you can't see from the finished product. And so I always enjoy seeing that kind of behind the curtain look. And they were both very vocal in the chat.
Yeah, and it's also kind of nice to see the thoughts of game developers from over a decade ago. Was it 15 years ago, I guess?
Right.
And the way that things have changed in the meantime, to have two female game devs who are working on, I don't know if Spy Fox series is really kind of the key or the cornerstone of the point and click adventure genre, but Humongous's work is moderately well known, I guess. So it's kind of nice to see just some perspectives and opinions there as well. That's cool.
So moving on to Steam and Valve news. We've hit over 1,000 Linux games on Steam, which is pretty exciting. A benchmark for sure.
There seems to be a little bit of a debate over what the 1,000th game was.
Yeah, a lot of people are pointing fingers at Parallax, but I am certain that when the list was still below 1,000, I saw Parallax contributing to that, 998 or whatever it was. But congratulations to everybody who has launched a game on Linux. That is awesome, and it's great to see that happen. I mean, how long did it take Mac OS to reach 1,000 games? It's much longer.
Definitely. And I mean, they had a similar push from Valve at the time when Valve was making a foray in there, especially because Apple had such a stance against games in general. And this kind of, I think, helped kind of start that process where Apple changed their focus and said, sure, we like games too.
To maybe give a little more perspective, this is a little more than a fifth of the total number of games available on Steam for Windows.
Right, it is still a small number. Oh wait, 1/5. Sorry, that's huge.
That's okay.
Yeah, it's funny. At the time that I wrote my my article on the Steam hardware and software survey, I think it was like 1.5% of Steam games were on Linux. So to move up to a fifth that's huge. Moving on to tech news, looks like all of Valve's GDC talks are now available for viewing. Any of you guys had a chance to check that out?
I've not seen.
I haven't yet taken a look.
Yeah, I've not seen their uploads.
Yeah, I've been pretty swamped. I haven't had a chance to look at them myself, but definitely looking forward to checking that out at some point. NVIDIA have launched a fairly powerful dev machine, which looks like it's geared towards AI development.
Right, looks like it's more geared towards machine learning, but definitely using GPU power to do that. I think one of the things we brought up, we were talking about this yesterday, was that at least they got 4 GPUs in that, so maybe SLI is hopefully around the corner, maybe?
Yeah, right.
And I do know that one of the Steam machines is already purporting to have 3-way SLI, so we'll see if that happens by November.
Yeah, so I haven't really come across anybody who's had a lot of success with SLI on Linux.
SLI works in the way that it doesn't not work, but it doesn't help at all, so it basically doesn't work.
Yeah, so this beast weighs in at was it $15,000 US, and has immense, was it 4 Titan cards, 336 gigabytes per second of memory bandwidth. That's mad. But yeah, obviously not aimed at end users, but it's neat to see that vendors like NVIDIA are shipping dev kits running Linux. That's cool.
Right, yeah, that's the piece that comes pre-installed with Ubuntu 14.04 and the newly released CUDA 7.
Which leads us to the newly released CUDA 7.
Segue, it's not just for writing.
Which has full Linux support, right?
Apparently, I haven't had time to read up on this stuff yet.
So, as Telly mentioned in the chat, SLI works if you have only one monitor.
Oh wow, really? Who uses one monitor?
Console users?
Dear. Alright, and on that note, we might move across to general gaming news. City Skylines is released. People have been playing that.
Yeah, and I saw that the developers actually reached out to Linux users for help with getting their performance improvements in place.
Yeah, which is really awesome to see that they care like that. And then they released the patch in order to fix performance issues, among other things.
For anybody who's not aware, City Skylines is a city building game in the style of SimCity, I guess, or drawing upon things like that. Have either of you had a chance to play it so far?
No, I have not.
I've not. But I know that there's been a huge amount of excitement, especially because it's not always online, unlike certain other games that are similar to it that recently come out. So,
yeah.
It has a much more traditional take on the genre, while still including a lot of new features.
Yeah, it looks neat. I've seen streams of it, but I kind of wary of picking it up because I know I just don't have time for it at the moment.
Yeah, I think that I'll probably pick it up at some point, because I don't have enough games to play. 300 is too much.
Hotline Miami 2 has been released.
John Drinkwater had helped a lot with the testing of Hotline Miami 2, which is pretty cool. So, any Linux problems, just go complain to him.
Yep, they're all his fault.
That's right. We love you, John.
Has anyone been able to play that?
Not I.
No, I never finished the first one, and then I'm not sure. I'm more interested, I think, in the soundtrack than I am the actual game itself.
Yeah, the soundtrack is awesome. I really enjoyed the first one as well. I was surprised by it after having picked it up in a Humble Bundle. So when I get the chance, I'll probably pick this one up too. Now, Hotline Miami 2 and City Skylines were both games that could have potentially been the 1000th game on Steam for Linux in most regions.
It works for me. They're both 1,000. Just depends on which game you like more.
Yeah, we can take it that way.
Every game is contributing to that 1,000.
So it looks like there was an update for Dying Light. It's got a new patch out. It seems to have some performance improvements. Here, I know you played that one. Have you seen any improvements in the recent patch?
Yeah, I was able to crank up the settings and still have a stable frame rate always above 30 and usually above 60. Now, my hardware is a little more powerful, but it worked fairly well. And I was streaming it at the same time, so while encoding, everything was pretty smooth. There's still some bugs they need fixed, but a lot of the bigger stuff is working fine. I feel like I can recommend it to people that have a new computer, but not anyone yet.
Not everyone, you mean?
Excuse me?
You said not anyone.
You wouldn't be able to run it, for example.
That's fine.
I wouldn't be able to run it.
I have new hardware, so it runs very well for me. But if you don't have new hardware, I would say that hopefully they can fix all these performance issues on Linux so that it's more playable.
Awesome.
It's fun, though.
So apparently Spec Ops The Line has a Linux depot kicking around. Now, I recall there being some hints of Linux support for that previously. Do you guys remember that, or am I making that up?
Well, the publisher is 2K, who's been showing Linux a lot more love than the other of the largest publishers.
Yeah, I don't remember anything specifically because I actually had that game prior, and I don't remember anything specifically about there being any movement on the Linux side of things until the Encrypted Depot showed up.
But yeah, so that's a fairly noted title.
Well, it's a good retelling of Heart of Darkness, the basis for Apocalypse Now, and it does a really good job of meshing the narrative into the gameplay. It never feels like the gameplay. It never feels like either one of them is really kind of overshadowing the other. It all kind of melts together very, very well.
Now, I'd seen all the advertisements for this game when it came out, but had never played it. What made me interested was that it was talked about in depth about how the story is on the Extra Credits YouTube channel. So apparently the story is implemented a little differently from how games traditionally do that.
So Outland has been released for Linux.
Which is interesting because it's a Ubisoft published title. Don't think there's many of those on Linux, are there?
Right, that's true. And I assume it's not using Uplay on Linux, which is awesome.
No, it is not using Uplay. I haven't played it, but I did confirm that.
I don't know if it uses on other platforms. But either way, good to have that one along as well.
Well, I'm excited about it because I believe that Housemarque is also responsible for Super Stardust, I believe it is.
Yeah, okay.
I would love to see that come over.
Bioshock Infinite has also been released for Linux. You guys had a chance to play that?
I have not.
No, I have it, but if you get it with the season pass and you go to install the whole thing, it's a whopping 42 gigs of disk space.
Wow.
At this point, I would have to get rid of some of my more less played games like Team Fortress 2. Okay, 36.6 according to Norbert.
Prohibitively large.
But either way, it's still a fairly large game. Most of what I've seen from people in the community is it runs well until it actually crashes.
Yeah, okay.
So performance is great until it crashes.
Which a lot of people were worried about, since it was released by Virtual Programming using their Eon technology.
Yeah, it's nice to see that maturing.
Yeah, a lot of people have bad memories of when The Witcher 2 first released. But it seems like it's coming along quite nicely. So we can be thankful for the support, I think.
Oh, absolutely, and I think that that's going to continue to improve. I mean, if you remember, Virtual Programming were the ones who actually got involved with kernel devs to actually get a security hole fixed. And they had a bit of back and forth, and this was during the improvements made to Witcher 2. So,
right.
Going forward, this could become just as good as any other translation layer.
Yeah, it benefits everyone.
So we've got a new Humble PC and Android bundle, which has a bunch of Linux games in it, and one title that is new to Linux.
Yeah, usually the PC and Android bundles have almost as good Linux support as the Humble Indie bundles. So it's nice to see these, even if many of these we probably all own already.
Yeah.
Yeah, many of these already were featured in earlier bundles and so on, absolutely. But it's also good to see some of these coming out for Android as well. It means that some of these developers have been able to kind of expand their platform base and reach a wider audience. I think that's good.
Yeah, definitely. And so the title that's not been on Linux before is The Inner World, which is a point-and-click adventure, I believe.
Yes.
That I don't know much about, I'm afraid. But I've heard that it's a fairly well-renowned and well-recognized German title. So looking forward to checking that one out.
It was actually so new that at the time that the bundle was announced, it was not yet available on Steam. So it now downloads on Steam.
Neat.
But yeah.
All right, so it looks like GOG has gotten another batch of LucasArts titles into their shop.
Yeah.
Looks like we've got Zach McCracken, The Dig, Loom.
So these titles now have Linux support, or are supported on Linux, on GOG via ScumVM. It'll be interesting to see, because the Dig's on Steam, right?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
It'll be interesting to see whether or not the the Steam builds of these games that have Linux support on GOG will wind up having Linux support on Steam as well. And so far that hasn't happened, I don't think.
Especially considering those are with ScumVM. Other games that use DOSBox, it would also be viable to release a Linux port on Steam. And we'll just have to see.
Yeah. But the Dig and Loom are pretty good titles. We did Loom a while back for Game Club and had Brian Moriarty join us and talk about stuff.
Professor Brian Moriarty.
Sorry, Professor Moriarty, yes. And also, on that note, recently Brian tweeted that he was interested in making a sequel to Loom. I think that was during the last GDC. He said that there were only a couple of people that he would trust to do such a thing. And that included Telltale and Double Fine.
And Wadjet Eye.
Oh, that's right, and Wadjet Eye, yeah. So 2 out of those 3 developers are Linux-oriented, so it's awesome as well.
Right, exactly, because Dave Gilbert seemed very excited about the possibility of it too as well, until they realized that it's not going to be as easy to get the rights to it. So no future Loom project for the time being.
Oh, really? I hadn't actually been following up whether or not there'd been any more information come out of that, but I would think that if anybody had the chance of being able to get those rights, that it would probably be Double Fine, who are already working with Disney to have some old LucasArts IP given new attention. But yeah, so I guess fingers crossed in the long run, but in the short term, it doesn't sound like anything is moving forward there. But Zach McCracken, I haven't played before. You played that, have you been?
I haven't. How
about you, Hero?
Don't think I'm old enough to qualify.
Ah. But yeah, that's something that's been on my to-play list for a long time. Moving on to crowdfunding. We've got Descent Underground mentioned here, which is an attempt at reviving the Descent franchise with a prequel. Initially, these guys weren't talking about platforms. I sent them a couple of messages and asked them what their plans were. And did my usual thing of suggesting that Linux not be a stretch goal and that they just announce it when they feel comfortable, and a little very brief chat about that. But it seems like since then they've updated their FAQ to say that they are, or to indicate that they're supporting all of the desktop platforms that Unreal 4 supports, which includes Linux. It seems like a kind of vague way of wording platform support, but if that's what they've got planned, then that's awesome.
And I think we'll see more too as they start to continue with development, start pushing things out there to see if it's actually going to be viable for them to hit all the platforms that UE4 supports. I mean, it sounds easy enough now. It's kind of like Morgan had mentioned earlier about Unity being able to do that kind of cross-platform. But then finding out that even though it did that, there were still things that had to be fixed after the fact that weren't as easy as just pushing a button.
Corbin's investigations, when asking about Linux support, got the reply, absolutely.
And that's why we've included it in the cast. And I'm actually looking forward to this. I mean, Descent was one of the first games to really kind of give that kind of free sense of movement, yet still doing that within a constrained space. And I mean, it really made me feel claustrophobic in a way that other games didn't.
Yeah, Descent has a different style of movement and such that a lot of people are craving, I think. That's why this is getting a lot of attention.
I gotta say that for me, what they're showing at the moment doesn't carry Descent's aesthetic, which is a little disappointing for me. But yeah, if they're able to pull off the gameplay, then that would be fantastic, because it's something that there's not a lot of titles out there that do offer that kind of stuff, and Descent franchise has always been fairly special to me.
All right, so I guess we can wrap that up then.
Yeah, awesome.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us.
If you have any feedback, you can email us at cast@steamlug.org.
You can always join us on IRC on Freenode. We're in #SteamLUG.
#SteamLUG.
Or #SteamLUG. You like that better?
On Freenode.
On Freenode. Fine.
Here on Mumble, join the Steam group, add us all as friends, watching comments on YouTube, subscribe, of course. Oh, we've revamped the...
There's Google Plus as well.
Yes, Google Plus. And Twitter. Mentioned that already.
Yeah.
But we've revamped the cast page, have we not, on the website? So it's more fun and exciting to listen to this.
Again, thanks for joining us all. Have fun, everybody.
Have fun. Bye.
Bye.
We're recording this on Friday. When is this? Is this the 20th? Misfire there, little brain fart. It's all good. Oh, I've stopped recording. Whoops. Hey, your mic's just gotten a little bit muffled there again, Morgan. Has it shifted or moved at all?
It might have. I've been dancing while we're talking.
Anything else been happening on the community front that you guys are aware of?
People played games.
It happens.